So while we're waiting, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andreas Persidis. I'm the CEO of a company called BioVista. BioVista does drug repositioning, which means we try and find new uses for existing drugs, or we try and predict side effects of drugs before they're obvious in the population. And I'm also the president of the Hellenic Biocluster, a cluster of all the Greek companies and academic institutions that are involved in the biotech with an export and high R&D sort of input. For those of you, I was lucky, I consider myself lucky to have been involved in AI from the very beginning. So when I was a student doing my doctoral sort of thesis, it was on AI. And that was back in the sort of the mid-'80s, more or less, when the field was starting. At the time, it was called expert systems, a bit of AI. And so I've gone through the AI winter, the previous, let's say, decade. And so now I'm pretty happy to see it is sort of picking up again. But having gone through the AI winter and having sort of experienced one of the difficulties of AI, which is acceptance by the user, we were very happy. We were very happy when relatively recently, which that's about 8 or 10 months ago, we received a call from a hospital, and that's Sarah Bush Lincoln Hospital in the US, who, having heard one of our presentations on drug repositioning, they came up to us and they said, this sounds all very interesting. Can you help us in personalized medicine? And what they were looking for was, strange as it might seem, this is one hospital that was feeling the pressure of competition, and they were looking how to differentiate their service from other hospitals in the US. And they thought that through personalized medicine they could achieve that, and specifically through our sort of flavor of personalized medicine. Namely, if we could help them optimize treatments of their patients, specifically patients with complex cases. Of course, we were very happy to sort of take on the challenge, so happy that we didn't even charge them at all. And for us, it was a sort of a pilot project, and it's a pilot project in our mind because we are looking to introduce these kinds of technologies in these kinds of institutions. And it's not obvious. Some of you, or probably many of you, will have heard of the IBM Watson solution. It's a very big sort of system. I'd say that IBM is almost betting the company on it. It's receiving huge visibility, huge marketing sort of push, yet it hasn't, it's also controversial. For example, recently they had a big sort of situation with Sloan, Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital in the US, and also with the MD Anderson, which was a huge installation, highly expensive, and yet they had sort of subpar results, according to some analysis. So the case they came up with was that they have a lot of patients, some of which are really complex patient cases. Lots of comorbidities, side effects the patients are reporting. They have to deal with drug-drug interactions. They need to reduce costs and so on and so forth. So kind of a complex case, and they wanted to start by focusing on these people because they felt that these would be the most highly sort of visible cases they could achieve success with. And so the answer was, or the question of them to us was, do you think that AI is going to work, especially in the view of recent events and developments with Watson and so on? And of course, the answer is we do think, the answer is yes, but there is a but. And what's the but? I mean, there's okay, AI, doing AI, having AI do Jeopardy or having AI win a Go game is fine. But when we're talking about healthcare and people, it's a slightly different ball game. I mean, we're talking about people's lives here. We're talking about organization reputation. And of course, we're talking about large investment decisions. If you're going to buy something like Watson, you're talking about many millions of dollars. At the same time, this is not a market I can just enter and sell almost anything. It's highly regulated. We're talking healthcare here, so we really need to make sure that any solution we come up with really works. And I'll probably come back to that as well. Related to this thing is that healthcare and health in general, it's not like engineering. It's an area where we're essentially working in an environment where we're dealing with uncertainty to the third degree. Why to the third degree? Because we don't know biology well enough, okay? So we don't know exactly how our biological systems sort of talk and work. We don't know well the disease states. So when a certain person goes ill, how exactly does that illness modify the healthy state? So there's uncertainty as well. And then there's a third level of uncertainty, which is precisely when we get a drug into our body, we don't know exactly how it works. We kind of know how it works, but not exactly, which is why we get side effects. So it's uncertainty times uncertainty. It's uncertainty of the third. Pretty uncertain environment. And then we have other additional complexities like comorbidities, biological pathway interaction, and so on. So it's a pretty complex problem we're dealing with. On top of that, we also, when we're dealing with patients, in hospitals, you have committee decisions. So you get all the doctors, especially in cases with comorbidities, they get together and they try to come up with the best sort of treatment plan. And there is in our experience, there's a very interesting sort of human factor element involved in this. Because it's in a decision by committee sort of situation, it's not just the science that plays a role. So we have the scientific facts. Yeah, we have scientific facts. We have the case context, so the context of each individual patient, which might be interpreted in a different way by different doctors in the committee. We have the personal experiences through which each doctor is interpreting the data, and we have also different criteria. And so all these guys and ladies are sitting around a table trying to come up with a sort of a consensus view. And you have multiple positions on the table, multiple dimensions, so multiple probably diseases they have to deal with. Each of the experts might bring different levels of supporting evidence to make their case. And also soft parameters like personality, rank. And we've actually seen this when we're selling, let's say, when we're talking to our customers and we're presenting the results of a project. We've often seen sort of alpha males or alpha females and beta. And depending on who's on your side, you might win or lose the case. So there is a case to be made, or how do you manage to make that conversation more objective? Through probably better data. And so when we're thinking about clinical decision support systems, what we're trying to come up with is based on our experience, we're thinking, okay, how can we use data to create richer, multidimensional arguments? So look at the health, look at the state of the patient, look at the context in general. How do we support explainability? One of the arguments made against Watson was that while it was great in giving recommendations, a lot of the times the doctors could not understand why those specific recommendations were being made. So they were saying, okay, I cannot make a decision if I don't understand the reasoning. And that, by the way, is something that has affected the design, the architecture of our own system, where we've employed a slightly different from the norm sort of attitude and design, which is we try and keep, like other people, of course, humans in the loop, but in a different way. We're trying to avoid the deep learning sort of paradigm, which is being sort of put forward by a lot of people right now. There's good areas of application for that paradigm, and there's not so good. Again, these systems need to provide easy access to the supporting evidence and be open-ended so that the doctors don't feel threatened and they feel that they're able to explore part of the context to their heart's content. So in our humble opinion, we think that these kinds of systems should support these kinds of capabilities. Challenges, I think I mentioned the first one, no black boxes. So these kinds of systems have to be open and allow doctors to understand why decisions are being made and where they're coming from, provenance. There's got to be trust. Again, one of the failures of AI and expert systems from the early days was that they were being, shoved down the necks and the throats of the targeted users, and they were saying, this is the solution you should follow. And there wasn't any time for onboarding, for them to see how these things are working, take into account the human factors. So you've got to build this thing over time. And we're trying to pick up sort of concepts and ideas from the gamification industry. How do you engage people? How do you make sure that they sort of come on board gradually? The provenance thing actually is also pretty important, and some of you might have heard, and I think the next speaker is going to be talking about the blockchain sort of architecture and technologies. We see that is pretty closely involved with this thing. So when decisions are being made, and probably when they're being made in different points in time, you need to be able to follow the provenance of decisions and data so that you can make a case or not, as the case might be. You need to be able to validate, so we're looking for evidence-based approaches. Interoperability, people talked about that again earlier, and actionability. So how do you design the system so that your doctor, who's pretty sort of busy guy or lady, can act on that? Very few things on our technology. I kind of covered a bit of those. So if you think of the two axes, I know what I know and don't know. Here's I know what I know, so it's the known knowns. I know what I don't know, so it's the scenario where you're kind of asking the right questions. These are more or less obvious. Here is where our system is kind of working. One of our assumptions is that there's so much knowledge out there. Just take into account there's about, just in healthcare, there's about 2 million, I think, counting publications per year. There's no way anybody can follow that sort of amount of data. So you've got to find, so there is, no one can be sure that, no one can be able to know everything, okay? So even in a company, even in a hospital, through, in big teams, you cannot be sure that you know everything that is relevant to your case. So our system sort of operates in this sort of quadrangle here. And I don't know, I guess it's the blue sky research. And so what we're doing is we're saying, okay, there's literature, there's published literature, there's many sort of data sources. If we could read those data sources and create sort of knowledge networks, more or less of kind of like what the eHF sort of project is talking about, can you put these things together and then create easily navigable sort of networks of connectivity to find non-obvious connections between stuff in general? Just very pictorial, so the thing just, there's the different levels of architecture behind the system. It reads the thing. It identifies items of interest like a gene name or a disease. We have an extraction engine, that's NLP. It identifies things. It creates what we call a multidimensional profile of all the entities that are relevant to biology. So every gene, every disease, every drug, every pathway has its own multidimensional profile, and then we match those profiles against each other, more or less. So, they look kind of like this, many billions of connections. So it's kind of obvious that we're talking about big data and about solutions to find, to navigate these kinds of networks and find obvious connections. Yeah, again, how the system works. It takes these profiles and it matches them and ranks them and so on and so forth. I won't stick there too much. And then the doctors can run this system in multiple runs and create the kinds of arguments I was talking about before. So you do a run with a specific viewpoint and you get a fact or some interaction. You run it again, you get another data point again and again, and eventually you create a kind of a biological plausibility argument which you can put together. Of course, you have all the supporting evidence behind that. And again, a few words about, so starting off with this sort of collaboration with Sarah Bush in the States, once we had set that one up, Hewlett Packard Enterprises came and knocked on our door and said, this looks interesting to us. Would you allow us to sort of to look into, the project? And we said, for a negotiable fee, we'll let you have a look. And so they were kind enough to support us. And so they're in the mix. For us, this is pretty exciting because I think we're talking here about the need. I think a number of people have talked about creating new value chains or creating ecosystem and putting, again, non-obviously connected partners. Or I would say partners or stakeholders who should be talking to each other but traditionally haven't been talking to each other. And so we think that this is a kind of in our mind, this is a pilot scenario. It's a pilot project where this is happening. We're putting two different kinds of stakeholders, in this case an IT company, with a hospital and a biotech, in this case company, an AI healthcare company. But we've already begun talking to these, to pharma people, to payers, and to patient groups. I mean, all these are stakeholders. Probably they might have been talking to each other on one-on-one, but we think that if we try and bring them together, and we manage to bring them together, that's going to be a context and an ecosystem that could produce sort of good results. Again, we definitely believe that we need early success stories or case studies people could talk about. So for us, as I said, we were happy not to take any money from Lincoln, from the hospital, because we thought they were giving us a huge case study to work with. I think that's done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.